I'm not going to be doing a big introduction here, except to introduce Pat Wozniak, who is a member of the Interbranch Council as president of the Vancouver, Washington branch. And she's the one that told us about the wonderful session that they had with Dr. Patel. So our colleague and neighbor to the north, Pat Wozniak, is going to introduce Dr. Patel. Thank you very much, Pat.
Thank you, Pat, for asking me to be here. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Neesha Patel to you. Dr. Patel is a family physician with special expertise in geriatrics. She studied medicine and did her residency at Sidney Kimmel Medical College of Thomas Jefferson University in Philadelphia. That is a mouthful. She moved to Portland about a year ago to take a position at the OHSU Center for Women's Health. In January of this year, Dr. Patel came and spoke to our branch on the topic of aging gracefully, and that's what you're going to hear today. I hope you enjoy it as much as we all did. And now to Neesha.
Hi, thank you everybody for having me. I have to say, I enjoy the camaraderie and the banter back and forth so much. It makes me very happy. So I am going to just pull my slides up here. Okay. And I'd also like to start by saying, feel free to interrupt if anybody has any questions. I'm sure there will be plenty of time for questions at the end as well. But please feel free to jump in and ask anything that you would like. So thank you, Pat, for the introduction and for having me here today. I've edited and added some things to the slides since I gave the talk in Vancouver from all the wonderful questions the ladies had for me there. And I realized, oh, you know what? These are some gaps in this talk. So let me add in a little bit more information. So I'm also hoping to learn from everybody and from your wisdom as well. If there are things that, you ask questions about, and we can talk about them together. So today's talk, we're going to talk about both the art and science of aging gracefully. And I will tell you that I actually have more slides about the art of aging rather than the science of aging. And really, so much of this is going to come from a book that was written called The Blue Zones. And if you haven't heard about that, I will talk to you about it much more once we get to that part of the lecture. So disclosures, nobody's paying me any kind of money to say why it's so wonderful to age gracefully and all the things that you can do to help. So we're going to start by talking about the science. So the key is always diet and exercise. And I think this part's a little bit tricky just because I feel like you could really Google, as you guys were talking about, Google anything and find a billion answers to the same question, right? So what kind of diet is good for you? How much exercise is good for you? So we'll talk about the things that are actually proven to be beneficial, particularly related to aging. So the Mediterranean diet, I'm sure many of you have heard, is really well known as being the best diet possible for healthy aging. And the reason behind that really is that it's linked to better brain function, to better mood overall. But the key is that it is very useful in terms of prevention. So preventing things like your risk for heart attack, stroke, cancer-related deaths, and also with pain. And if we go down to the very molecular level of all of these things, the basis of them is inflammation. So the thought is that, or not the thought, I should say, the data behind it is that the Mediterranean diet really helps to reduce the amount of inflammation that happens in our brain, in our blood vessels, in our joints. And that really helps ultimately to having a better quality of life, because ultimately, I think in my mind and in the mind of most people that I've taken care of, it really is quality of life and not quantity of life. But certainly the Mediterranean diet is helpful in preventing inflammation that really starts a lot of disease processes. So what does it consist of? So really fresh fruits and vegetables, 5 different colors daily. I remember when I was living in Philadelphia, my niece and nephew lived pretty close to me and they came home. They're twins and they're almost 12. And I remember when they were much younger, they came home and they were showing me, they're like, look at what we did in school today. They were talking about nutrition and they're like, we have to eat all the colors of the rainbow. So for a while, they actually had my sister have a chart up and mark off all the different colors that they were eating every day. Luckily, she really enjoys cooking and engaged them with this for a while. But there is a lot of data to say that, if you think about you're eating different colors, you're getting different nutrition through the different foods that you're eating. Whole grain legumes, so think of your lentils, primarily in terms of protein. They, aside from the grains and legumes, it comes from fish and only occasionally chicken breast. They also recommend healthy fats. So things like olive oil, avocados, nuts, almonds, and walnuts are the best because they tend to have more of the healthy fat and less of the bad fat. Seeds, and then low fat Greek yogurt. And healthy fats are actually needed for good brain function. So that's an important part of the diet. And they really stress that aside from all of these things that you should eat, there's also a list of foods that you should not eat. So almost no red meat, really limiting other dairy fats, and limiting sugar. And then they do actually recommend drinking a glass of wine daily, but probably no more than that. So one of the excellent questions that I had from the group in Vancouver is, well, we're supposed to get enough calcium because we need to keep our bones strong and healthy as we get older, but you're really saying don't eat a lot of lactose-based products, essentially, right? Just the low-fat Greek yogurt, not a lot of others. So primary calcium sources that come in the Mediterranean diet do come from the Greek yogurt, but also from the green leafy vegetables, which they encourage that you eat. And specific fish can also give you the right mix of right types of calcium, I should say. Will give you calcium and the right types of fish. Sorry, trying to get that sentence out. But the data behind this is actually mixed on whether or not this is enough calcium. I think you'd have to be pretty picky and just really making sure that you're eating the specific calcium-based food, high calcium content foods to make sure you got enough. So because the data is mixed on whether the Mediterranean diet gives you enough calcium or not, my gut instinct from things that I was reading was really to say, if you're really strictly doing this diet, it's probably better to supplement with calcium. And this should say calcium with vitamin D because you do need vitamin D to absorb the calcium. But you should probably supplement if you are doing a pure Mediterranean diet. And then these are two of the, I think, most recommended cookbooks for for adhering to a Mediterranean diet. And this is from the Blue Zones, actually, which we'll talk about soon. And then this other cookbook called Simple. There are some other more adventurous cookbooks out there, but I have actually been recommending these books to my patients that I see in clinic. And I've had some of them come back, and particularly about the Blue Zones kitchen, to say that they were thrilled with some of the recipes that they've tried out. They've really enjoyed it. And it, even for people who say that they do primarily their diet sounds like a Mediterranean diet, it's always nice to have other recipes and add variety to help keep you motivated to eating the healthier foods. So the other thing that is important with this diet, kind of the other molecular change that happens, is that we know that the bacteria in our gut actually plays a pretty big role in terms of the pathway to our brain. It affects mood and memory. And again, this gut-brain connection is again really about inflammation. You kind of see this pattern that comes up a handful of times throughout this talk. So what you're trying to do is to improve the gut microbiome so that you have less of this inflammation, and again, allows you to have a healthier life. What's interesting is, though they are prebiotics and probiotics that are on the market, that, you know, they say that taking these can have anti-aging effects, but you really don't need to necessarily take the supplementation. You could just change to the Mediterranean diet, and on its own, just given the foods that you eat, it changes your microbiome to being less inflammatory just within 2 to 3 weeks, which is pretty remarkable that quickly it can change. In general, I did end up talking to one of our naturopaths that we have on staff as a part of our primary care clinic. And she says typically she doesn't even, for most people, she doesn't recommend prebiotics or probiotics if the diet has plenty of fiber in it, because that tends to mean that you have a healthy gut microbiome. It's allowing the food to move through regularly. But she did have some recommendations that if somebody was looking for probiotics, she says shelf stable, her recommendation is always Florastor or PB8, which is at Walgreens and Target. Or she says the other best one really is the refrigerated version of probiotics, which is, there's a brand called Megaflora that is available at Whole Foods and New Seasons. And I haven't had patients that have taken these, but I do really trust Dr. Shinto, who we work with. So those were her recommendations for probiotics that you can take to help with your gut flora. So the last part of this is movement. And it's always a challenge to say, am I exercising enough? Am I doing the right amount of exercise? Should I be doing more? The recommendation for things that really do help, and when I say help, I'm thinking about different things that these different exercises help with. So aerobic exercise, for example, you don't have to run for it to be considered aerobic. You can walk. If you walk a mile versus run a mile, you essentially get the relatively the same benefit. It's the same distance. It's just one might happen quicker than the other one. But 5 times a week. And swimming is also another great exercise because it takes the pain off of your joints. And this is more for your heart health, right? You're exercising your heart. In terms of balance exercises, which is actually really great for like if you're somebody who's maybe predisposed to falls, or you're worried about falling because maybe you know that you have some weaker bones and we really want to prevent fractures. Tai Chi is wonderful 2 to 3 times a week. And Oregon actually has a state program for Tai Chi. And I hear it was kind of on hold for a little bit with the pandemic, but that during the summer they try to do outdoor classes, and it's all across the state. And so there are definitely programs, but Tai Chi is a great way to really help with your balance. And then perhaps I think the most underutilized exercise is strength training, because it's often mistaken for saying like, oh, I need to be lifting really heavy weights. You can have like 2 bottles of water that you're using, right? It doesn't have to be heavy weights, but just something that is allowing you to strengthen your muscles. 2.5 pound weights, 5 pound weights does not have to be particularly heavy. Not only does that improve your bone health, and I've actually had folks that I've taken care of who have reversed their bones from osteoporosis to osteopenia, or even normalized bone, just by adding in muscle strengthening 3 times a week, probably for about 10, 15 minutes each time. But the other thing is that they are seeing that it is really improving cognition in women, particularly between the mid 60s to the mid 70s. So really kind of helping prevent that cognitive change that can happen. So that's all I have in terms of the science piece, but I'm going to get into the part that I really like, which is the art of aging gracefully, and kind of talking about how important it is to have purpose in life and really being engaged socially, which I think you all are such a wonderful example of what was happening with the interaction and for everybody chatting and saying hi to one another at the beginning. It's such an important part of, maintaining that connection as we age, because it's an important part of good brain function and an important part of quality. So jumping into this, I just wanted to point out that this is a very busy slide, but Bloomberg puts out the healthiest country index every few years. So the top 3 are Spain, Italy, and Iceland. And if you do a quick look down the list of all the countries, you will see that the US is not even in the top 20 of the healthiest countries. We fall at number 35, which isn't great. So what are other people doing that perhaps we aren't doing? So let's take a look at that. So this is where we're going to jump into talking about the blue zones. Dan Buettner, who works for National Geographic, actually traveled around the world, particularly to these 5 hotspots, which has the highest percentage of centenarians. And essentially what Dan Buettner did as he traveled and kind of lived in each of these places for longer periods of time is he came up with a list of the top lessons, the overarching lessons that were similar in places that otherwise would seem so different. So in Okinawa, Japan, Ikaria, Greece, Sardinia, Italy, Nicoya, Costa Rica, and Loma Linda, California, which is surprising since the US falls so low, but this is actually a community of Seventh-day Adventists who do a lot of things similarly to some of these other communities. So we'll talk about what those lessons are, but I just wanted to share these beautiful photos of Italy and Japan. These are of Sardinia and Okinawa, just absolutely gorgeous. So let's jump in. And the other thing I wanted to say is we aren't just going to talk about the lessons that were learned, but how can we actually incorporate them into our day-to-day lives to actually make the most out of the lessons that they're recommending. So lesson 1 is to move naturally. So we talked about exercising earlier and what that means. But for these communities, they found that they just have this lifestyle where you are quote unquote exercising for the long haul. So it is low impact exercise. Well, I wouldn't necessarily consider working as a shepherd a low impact exercise with the amount of walking and hills, I am sure. But they consider that having some amount of movement every single day as a part of your regular lifestyle makes a big difference. So aside from the Sardinians, they talk about the Okinawans who actually spend hours in their gardens every day. And everybody actually has a garden at their home and they eat a lot of the vegetables that they grow. And then the Adventists that are in Loma Linda, California, take nature walks regularly. So it's being active. And they actually stress in the book, Blue Zones, is that this isn't about running a marathon. This isn't about going jogging every day. It really is just about making sure that movement is a big part of our life. And I think in a weird way, the pandemic has probably encouraged many of us to start taking part of that again if we hadn't been, just because going outside was one of the few things that we could actually do, sometimes safely, depending on where you live. This next lesson, this phrase, Hara, hachi, bu, actually comes from Japan, though the lesson overall is present in all of the communities. They actually speak this before eating a meal. They say it out loud, and it is a reminder to say, stop eating when you are 80% full. So essentially, this means stop eating when you're no longer hungry, not until you feel really full. So some tricks for how to actually do this is if you've prepared a meal, serve your plate at the counter, put your food away before you take your plate to the table. So that kind of prevents that overindulgence and overeating. Another good mind trick, which they actually teach in some, I think it's called Noom, which is one of the diet apps to help you lose weight, where they say you're kind of teaching your brain, even if it's the same amount of food on a smaller plate, our brain interprets it as this is more food. I'm feeling more satiated by eating this amount of food. Eating more slowly, sitting down to eat. And what they saw throughout all of these communities is that the larger meals were always at the beginning of the day, and the smallest meal of the day is what they had in the late afternoon or early evening. This next lesson, the plant slant, so really avoiding meat and processed foods. And this really goes hand in hand with the Mediterranean diet that we talked about earlier, which is also pretty similar to lesson 4, where they say drinking red wine in moderation is also an important part of healthy living, and doing it consistently is what's important. And really in all of these communities, I was thinking of this earlier and forgot to mention it, they also looked at, as people aged into their 100s, also looked at their cognition and saw if they were having issues with their memory or if they did okay. And by and large, about 2/3 of the people actually maintained their close to the same level of brain function, even well into their hundreds, kind of adapting with these lessons. Lesson 5, this is really your life purpose, kind of not just thinking about it, but really writing it down and practicing what your purpose is. So multiple communities have different words that they use, but essentially it translates to why I wake up in the morning. And I think this is pretty powerful. I think many of us probably practice it without really stopping to think about it. But they do encourage to write a personal mission statement, and you should continue, no matter what age, to try learning new skills. It is a form of brain exercise. If you've been wanting to learn a new language, do it, right? It's learning anything is helping to exercise your brain. The next lesson is downshifting. And I will say I am probably terrible at downshifting. And I think part of that is societal, the pressure to always kind of make sure you get X number of things done and meet all these deadlines. But you really do have to take time to decompress and to slow down. And this really what the hope is that when you downshift and you kind of allow this additional time, it also gives you the time to eat better, being around friends and family, giving you time to focus on the things that bring purpose to your life, and gives you time for spirituality and for family. And again, when you are taking time to meditate or calm down, this again reduces inflammation. So they do encourage meditation, 10 to 30 minutes a day. And I just put this fact in here because I thought it was very interesting that we do take the shortest paid vacation in the industrialized world. Doesn't quite, I should say it probably reflects in the fact that we're number 35 in the list of healthiest places around the world. The next lesson is belonging. So participating in some type of spiritual community. These communities that they looked at, there was the Seventh-day Adventist that I mentioned, Catholic communities, a group was Greek Orthodox, another group participated in ancestor worship. It doesn't matter what your spiritual beliefs are, but kind of being in, and again, this is a part of being a part of a community of sorts, that they see that if you do this even once a month, it has benefit. And I think this kind of goes hand in hand with some of the other lessons, is that it's allowing you to take that time to downshift, do self-reflection, and kind of help you build more of an expansive network. Lesson 8, loved ones first. So really making family a priority. What they found was really socially integrated within all of the blue zones is that most homes were multi-generational. And so elders who lived with their, this should actually say grandchildren, overall, those elders were less susceptible to disease, tended to eat healthier, had less stress, less likely to have serious accidents. And I think this particular aspect of being in a multi-generational home is not as socially integrated into the US, the lifestyle. So, one of the things that Dan Buettner says is this isn't all lost just because we aren't established that way. You can still make every Tuesday night is dinner with grandma, right? So kind of building in that family time. So it's a part of what they always do, what you're looking forward to, and really also showing as an example from parents to their kids that you're making family a priority. And this is my favorite one, lesson 9, finding the right tribe. So really being surrounded by people who share your similar values. And this is essentially the form of social connection that really matters. But what I love about this is that the Okinawans have what they call moais. So it's a group of people who, it's kind of like your parents decide when you're young, the 5 of you are going to be friends, whether you like it or not, and you're stuck together for life. So it's not that you just socialize with one another, you're also a financial support to the other person or as families, but you actually go and spend 30 minutes with them every day. Like you have some sort of a connection and some sort of an outlet. And, I was thinking of this and how it's a little bit, again, different in the US, since most of us don't end up staying in the same place that we grow up in. And there's a lot of moving around. And I was thinking, I have one friend that I've known since I was 6 months old. They moved in down the street from us. She now lives in North Carolina and I live here. But even when we went to college, we ended up in the same apartment complex somehow, even though we were at 2 different schools. We were nearby. And I could tell you her phone number by heart from as a little kid, having to dial it regularly. But if anyone asked me my husband's phone number, I'd have to pull out my phone and look at it, right? So having your right tribe and the people that you talk to regularly really matters. And this is actually the theory behind why women potentially have a longer life expectancy, because most women do seem to naturally seek this out and want to have people that, your friends who you perhaps discuss what you're going through with, whereas men typically don't always have that. So since I gave this talk, there was a bit on NPR that somebody else at work shared with me that I listened to. And I've shared these slides, so you guys will also be able to look up this. It's an 8-minute interview with Arthur Brooks that's on NPR. And he is a social scientist who recently wrote a book that came out just a couple months ago called From Strength to Strength, Finding Success, Happiness, and Deep Purpose in the Second Half of Life. And his interview was very interesting because he talks about how what he was finding in his research is the people who at an earlier time in their life were very accomplished or professionally driven are the ones that tend to have the most difficulty in the second half of their life, because they may look at things as it's downhill from now, where I already did everything I was going to do. Now, what am I going to do? Which does kind of link back to saying you need to continue to find a purpose. And those that do better are the ones that look ahead and say, it's not the second half of life, but it is the second act of life. So I think it's a good listen, and I am sure that I will at some point definitely end up reading this book just to get his take on it. And the last part of this that I just wanted to share is I did take some time to kind of think about if I had anybody in my life who perhaps exemplified or did some of these things, these lessons naturally that, without really saying that these are things you need to do in your life, but kind of naturally set that precedent. And it made me think of my eldest aunt, who lived until her late 80s, lived in India. She is the eldest of 8 siblings. My dad is number 7 of 8 siblings. And I only met her once in 2015 when I traveled back to India with my dad. And it was the first time he had seen his sister in 37 years. But when we went to her house, she still lived in the same village she did when my dad had immigrated from India to the US. And these are actually the steps leading up to their home. So initially I entered the house. I was a geriatrics fellow in panic because I could see the arthritis in her feet and her hands, and everything was concrete. And you can see that's actually dried sugar cane that's next to her, which she actually was using as her walking stick. And it was very dimly lit in her house. And all I could think of is, oh my goodness, she's going to fall and she's going to fracture something. And that was the way I interpreted the surroundings. But then as I saw it more, I realized that though she had declining vision and she had bad arthritis, she had such a robust community. Her back door, actually, it was all flat in the back when she went out, and lots of homes right there. Everybody would walk by there. I think in the time that we were there, like 3 neighbors stopped by to check in on her. They would bring her food, was very well respected in the community. And she still ran the farms. She never went out to the farms to see what crops were growing, but she had a really good community that she could rely on, and they would come back and report and tell her what's happening and what crops they were going to send out. And, but she was still able to maintain and do everything that she wanted up until the time that unfortunately she did fall and hurt her hip or fracture her hip. And she ended up being able to stay at home with the family. But she definitely did many of the lessons that are in Aging Gracefully. So I have the utmost respect for this aunt. So I just wanted to share that personal piece with you. And that's really all I have in terms of the lessons in Aging Gracefully, but I am happy to take questions and try to answer what I can. And I will stop sharing my slides.
So anyone have a question? Dr. Patel.
Please call me Neesha.
Neesha. Mary Pat.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I have to admit, I listened to the first 10, 15 minutes of this on my phone because I had to pick up my son at the airport. And so I might have misunderstood something. But what I think I heard, and please correct me if I'm wrong, was that one of the advantages of the Mediterranean diet is that it's anti-inflammatory. And so here's my question. I mean, it's fairly heavy, or at least it includes legumes and grains and so forth. There have been recent diets, I forget the name of this one book I bought, that are specifically anti-inflammatory, at least so they say, that do not allow eating legumes or grains. And so I'm curious to know how they could be in one and not in the other. So if you can speak to that, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
I wonder, was that the FODMAP diet by any chance? Does that sound familiar?
It doesn't
No.
sound familiar, but
No. Okay.
I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. I mean, at the end of the day, there are so many variations and so many diets out there. And I do think that a big part of this ends up being, what foods do you eat that make you feel well, right? If there are certain foods that you eat that you realize you tend to get more joint pains with, or you tend to feel more stomach upset with, probably not things that you would want to eat. Now, in terms of why that particular one says to not eat beans, whereas this one does, it's just differing data, right? And I think, unfortunately, you could probably research and say and make a lot of conclusions to say one thing versus another. So I would say, from what I have read overwhelmingly, that the Mediterranean diet is in general anti-inflammatory. But again, there's plenty of data and science out there, but it is all individualized. It's not one size fits all. That's for sure.
Okay.
I had a question about the Mediterranean diet as well. I recently was reading things that said that women our age should be getting around 75 grams of protein a day, and men should be getting 90. Is that possible to do on this diet?
Sorry, I lost my pointer for a second to unmute myself. I will be honest and say I have not sat down to say, based on the various recommendations, if it is possible, but I would say that from the amount of data that there is about the Mediterranean diet, I suspect that between the beans and the legumes and the fish, that you should be able to get enough protein. It's not just one source of protein, I guess, is what I'm saying. There's a variety of ways to get it. So I think it's possible. It may, sometimes sitting down with a nutritionist and kind of getting the nitty gritty of all those things could be helpful depending on what your own needs are. But I would imagine there are enough options to get you substantial protein.
And I just wanted to let people know that I'm calling on people who have raised their virtual hand, because there's so many of us, it's hard to see someone who actually has just a hand up in the screen. So, Monica, you're next.
Hi. I also have a question about the Mediterranean diet, which I do try to follow 90% of the time. But my question is that we all know it's so much healthier to eat food without chemicals and organic foods, but we can't always get everything, organic fruits and vegetables, etc. We can't always get everything without chemicals or sprays. And so you had mentioned that if you are doing the Mediterranean diet, supplements probably will not be needed. But in the case where we can't be all organic, is that one case where you'd recommend supplements? And then also, same question related to osteoporosis, especially if we can't be purely organic with our proteins.
So my disclaimer there is I'm not a fan of supplements in general. I think that is heavily marketed. the multivitamins, I should say, not isolated single vitamins, just because if we look at our body's ability to actually break down a small tablet that has so many different vitamins in it, our body can only absorb so much. And though some of them are marketed to say this has 500% of your daily vitamin C, physically, your body can only absorb part of that. It's probably not even going to absorb 100% of your daily recommended amount, and you're probably just going to flush all of that out of your system. So I typically don't recommend supplements other than if you have specific things. So for example, if you are somebody who's at higher risk for bone loss and you're taking calcium and vitamin D, I think those supplements are important. If you're taking individual ones, then your body can absorb them much better. In terms of whether or not the foods have to be organic, yes, it is probably much better. There's probably going to be more and more data coming out about all the additives and things in food that are harmful for us in addition to what's already out there. But I think just at the end of the day, we can't avoid it entirely, right? It's not possible. It's everywhere. So again, kind of doing the best that you can with the diet without getting mad at yourself if you're not following it perfectly, right? Show yourself some grace. If your friend was like, oh, today I had half a slice of apple pie, you're not going to yell at them for doing that. So if you eat a little bit of an apple pie and it's not in the Mediterranean diet, it's okay.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Jill, and I just wanted you to know, Joyce asked for number 4, and I put it in the chat that number 4 was about drinking red wine, when we never would forget that one. Jill.
Yes, please, the last screen that you had up there with the 3 maxims, eat your veggies, have.
Yes, that quote said, eat your vegetables, have a positive outlook, be kind to people, and smile.
Eat your veggies, have positive outlook, be kind to people, and smile.
Mm-hmm.
That's me, except the veggies.
There's always something to work on.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
That is you, Jill.
Thanks, Nancy.
Janet, you're next.
Hi, thank you. So I know that we're supposed to limit sugar, and I don't use artificial sweeteners at all, but I'm wondering, is honey a better sweetener if I'm going to have one, or is raw sugar better, or are they all basically the same as white sugar and it doesn't matter?
So I would say honey and raw sugar are probably better simply because they're not processed like white sugar. I don't know how much sugar you have to consume that's natural and unprocessed for it to make a difference as opposed to processed sugar, if that makes sense. It's always better if it's a simple enough exchange that you can make in your day-to-day. For example, if you're adding honey to your tea instead of processed white sugar to your tea, it is definitely better.
Thanks.
Okay, Margaret Drummond, please.
We had a friend staying with us, and he was reading a Dr. Gundy book about inflammation. And he said that if you pressure cook beans, the bad stuff that is in them goes away, and you can eat as many beans as you want on the Mediterranean diet. That's just a comment.
That's good to know because I pressure cook a lot of beans for the Indian food that I cook. So that's helpful.
And Miss Pats.
Thank you so much for this, Neesha. And I think I really appreciate your talk about positive attitude. In our session last night, we talked about that, about getting along, and also about smiling. And I think we're all pretty stressed right now, and we need to try to avoid that, like maybe stop watching the news and some of the horrible things that are going on. But I read a really short quote from a wonderful author a couple of weeks ago, and she said, "History is long, life is short, we are very small. We should seek to be kind, not judgmental, and try to put things in perspective." And I really like that quote.
That is wonderful. I really like that as well. And you're right. I used to say this past year, 2 years, I don't even know where we're at anymore. It seems like a bit of a time warp. It has been a really stressful time. And I think for everybody in many different forms. And I think just it is so much easier said than done. And I should probably take my own advice, is that we should really, if you're recognizing times where you're like, I'm really stressed, I can't think clearly, I'm being angry or cranky, that's a good time to say, I'm just going to step away, close the door, do some meditation, some deep breathing. And really, it takes a lot of practice, but those things really help in terms of, deep breathing lowers the cortisol, or the stress hormone that your body makes, which causes weight gain, right? So there's that aspect of it, but it also helps to slow down your heart rate and lower your blood pressure and really calm down that adrenaline. And sometimes we have to make decisions of doing what's necessary. I was driving into work today, and I usually listen to OPB on my drive in, and I listened to about 10, 15 seconds, and I was like, not today. I'm just going to drive to work in silence today. Sometimes it's just, it's not to say that we're not going to stay informed, but you do have to do that piece of self-care and just kind of pause when it's too much.
Pat Lehman.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Neesha. This has been very informative. And this might end up being a little plug for a publication, but are you familiar with the Center for Science in the Public Interest publication called Nutrition Alert? It's a little monthly that comes out.
No, I don't know about it.
Oh, it is just full of the kind of information that you have been talking about. And it is very informative. It is really science-based about the food that we eat and should not eat. And it has these little evaluations of like bread, and it will just list all the breads that you could think of and which ones are heart healthy and why and so forth. So it's a really interesting publication. I do recommend it.
Do you mind telling me the name again? I just want to jot it down.
Yes, it's called Nutrition Alert, and no, Nutrition Action, excuse me. They do alerts as well. And it's published by the Center for Science in the Public Interest, CSPI.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
I appreciate it.
Katie.
I just wanted to say that one of the things that was talked about was getting outdoors. And to me, that's one of the things that I've really focused on during the pandemic, is that just the blessing it is to live where we do, where we can get out and we can enjoy. And right now the flowers are beautiful. And other thing that's not mentioned is that many of us live in houses, a situation where we can have bird feeders out. And it's so much fun. And you could even call it a form of meditation, but just watching all the different birds that come in. And I have one feeder right on my kitchen window, and the finches come up there, and sometimes the females are really nasty to the males. But it's just, you just sit there, and it's simple, and yet it's cheap to do. And so I do thank our host for all the information. Those really good, but I probably will never be good at following all the eating rules. But I think, to me, being able to be out the outdoors and just that whole thing, that just is a really uplifts my whole spirit.
Thank you for that. I agree. I moved from Philadelphia where I had a condo, and so I had a roof deck, so I had a lot of plants and containers. But when I moved here, I actually had a pandemic wedding, and my husband has lived in Portland for a long time, and so he started getting the backyard ready that they hadn't really taken care of because he knows how much I really love to garden. So I've been learning about different plants and native plants, and I can't even remember the name, but I put in some flowers that attract hummingbirds, and I'm just so excited to kind of see what happens, and all the hours of work and the tendonitis I gave myself pulling out old evergreen bushes. Everything's blooming this year. So it's happy and it's colorful, and people who walk by are like, thank you for all the flowers in your garden. So you're right. It's a very meditative process to be able to have that to sit and enjoy.
Anyone else have any questions? Charlotte, you need to unmute yourself. Let me try to do it. Nope. There you go.
It's so important to take fresh flowers to your seniors. We have two next door to us that are, 95 and 97, and they love to have fresh camellias. Anything that you have that is blooming can be shared with our seniors, and their beautiful smiles are worth every minute. That's it.
That's a great idea. I send flowers to my mom a lot. She lives in Tacoma, and she always tells me how many vases she's put them in all over her apartment. And so every day I get to hear how many vases she has all over her apartment. So yes, the flowers are really important. Any other questions? You can wave at me or raise your virtual hand. Jane?
Sue Clump has one too.
Okay. Here, I've unmuted you, Jane.
Oh, for those of us who did not write quickly enough, could we just have a 1, 2, 3, 4 quickly recap what the categories were?
Are you referring to the lessons?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Let's see. Lesson 1 was to move naturally.
Okay.
Lesson 2 is stop eating when you're 80% full.
Okay.
Lesson 3 is the plant slant. So having more of a plant-based diet.
Right.
And lesson 4 is a glass of wine.
Yes, everybody got that one.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're good after that, I think. Anybody else? Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And Sue, please.
Just wanted Dr. Patel to tell you how refreshing it is to hear this from a physician. My rheumatologist, I asked him once, what can I do to naturally fight inflammation? And he said, you're very intelligent, and I know you researched, I can tell by your questions, so you can figure that out. In the meantime, just take this and this and this medication. So it's refreshing to hear a total different perspective coming from a physician. So thank you.
You're very welcome.
Pat, I think we can wrap her up.
Can I make one comment?
Oh, Catherine.
Yeah. One of the other things that can really make a difference is having animals.
Yes.
Particularly dogs get people out walking, even if they don't want to go because they've got to go. And cats are very loving and soothing.
Yes, mine is right there.
And sometimes birds are helpful too. All kinds of different animals can be really socializing in a way.
I wholeheartedly agree. I was thinking, I was like, oh, I actually earlier today, as I was driving in and seeing everybody walking their dogs this morning, and thought they really missed that one in the lessons. Pets are very important. So thank you for that.
I see Susan Walke has a question.
I just really identified with loved ones first. I am fortunate that my grandson, who lives here in Lincoln City, was born in January of 2020. And I don't know how I would have made it through the last 2 years without him.
Oh.
Yes.
So Clump, did I just not put your hand down? Great.
I agree about the pets. We adopted 2 cats. Actually, they came from Roseburg after the fires. So 2 kittens and their sisters, and they play together and they fight, but they keep us busy and very, very happy and active. And there's one of them. That's the other one, Tina. Thank you again, Neesha. It's been such a delight to have you with us. I'm so impressed by the number of people that we had on this event. Neesha, this has been just wonderful. And again, I thank Pat Wozniak for sharing your information with us, because I think you've been a big hit and very helpful to all of us.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity.